Hello class, I'm Instructor Hollon, and this lecture is on ethical relativism. We begin with the distinction between descriptive versus normative ethical relativism. This section introduces the problem of skepticism about ethical judgments. Skepticism may result from two main areas, epistemology or ontology. In the first place, the skepticism results because of a doubt about what we can know. In the second case, the skepticism arises because of what we think exists. There are some good reasons to be skeptical about ethical reasoning. Factually speaking, there are global disagreements about what is ethical. So this view is called descriptive because it follows from observations of disagreements. According to the premise of normative relativism, moral norms and assessments are valid because someone maintains them. Normative relativists believe that human acts, decisions, or emotions specify the criteria of moral assessments. Moral relativism is the view that moral judgments are true or false only relative to some particular standpoint, for instance, that of a culture or a historical period, and that no standpoint is uniquely privileged over all others. See 11, 2019, pages 189 to 190 for the citation. This point is made most evident when taking into account the different values that span different cultures. Some cultures hold that bribery is moral while others condemn it. In some cultures, women are allowed to wear short skirts while they are expected to cover their legs and hair in other cultures. So the skeptical argument here is that factual disagreements show that morality itself is relative. Elwood theorizes that morality is a consequence of survival and should be classified under sociology. See his Ethics Are Culturally Relative in Archie, 2004, pages 25 to 36. However, recalling the distinction between facts, descriptions, and values that we looked at in discussion of the Azot problem, it may be that some cultures are wrong while others are right in some cases. Simply because some cultures hold certain values does not mean that they should hold those values. Furthermore, the UN issued a Declaration of Human Rights in 1948, and this acknowledges the strength of this line of reasoning because it demonstrates widespread and international agreement about morality. Hence, the mere fact of cultural disagreement about what is ethical is insufficient to support meta-ethical relativism. Meta-ethical relativism moves beyond the fact of moral disagreement and theorizes that there are no universal principles that support moral judgments, or there are no universal moral properties that support moral judgments. At best, observations of both disagreement and agreement would apparently cancel each other out, though. So, further argumentation is needed to support ethical relativism or objectivism than mere observation. We next look at individual versus cultural relativism. There are also different forms of relativism, such as individual relativism, that says moral judgments are subjective to the individual, while cultural relativism says that moral values and norms are fixed by individuals in a culture. The first case, moral values differ from person to person. In the second case, moral values differ from culture to culture. Strong and weak relativism. There are additionally degrees of strength regarding the relativist's position. Strong relativism says that no universal principles ground moral judgments. Weak relativism concedes that there may be such principles, but these are expressed differently by different cultures. So we next look at reasons supporting ethical relativism, apart from the argument from disagreement at which we just looked. We'll factor that into the discussion. The first supporting reason draws from the diversity of moral views. We previously reviewed this argument. It begins by pointing out that there is no general agreement about what is ethical, the type of general agreement about what is or is not a fact in science. It then concludes from the lack of universal agreement to the conclusion that there is no universal ground for ethical judgment. Okay, for details, see 11, 2019, pages 189 to 191. Elwood again, Ethics are Culturally Relative in Archie and Archer, 2004, pages 25 to 36, and Matthews, 2020, page 9. The next supporting reason is from Tolerance and Open-Mindedness. This argument suggests that in the interests of avoiding condemning attitudes towards others on the basis of disagreement or difference, we should accept ethical relativism. As Raskala explains, we ought not judge other ethical codes as inferior to our own. Matthews 2020, pages 9 and 13 to 14. The next support for ethical relativism is drawn from moral uncertainty. This argument focuses on our inability to identify a clear course of moral action in some cases. Since we cannot always be clear about what is ethical, we cannot agree about the criteria of moral assessment. We should be skeptical about all our moral judgments, since we might be mistaken even when we think we're right. All right, for more details, see 2019, page 190 for that one. And then last of all, situational differences support ethical relativism, arguably. This argument reasons from the fact of differing transcultural conditions to the conclusion that morality is not universal. Since there are such wide differences from place to place and time to time, in one place there may be an abundance of water and in another a drought. In one place there may be a large population and in another a minuscule one. It is best to hold that morality has no universal basis. This is Westermarck's argument in Ethics Are Relative. See the Archie and Archie Reader, 2004, pages 37 to 47. So we have four main lines of support for ethical relativism: diversity of moral views or disagreement, tolerance and open-mindedness. We should be tolerant of different views. Moral uncertainty. We're not always sure of our moral judgments, so we should accept that others, even though when we disagree, could be correct. And situational differences. There are so many differences across time and culture that make for different judgments. We can't account for them all. So 4 lines of support for ethical relativism. Now the question is, are these reasons really convincing? Okay, let's look at that diversity of moral views argument again. We already looked at it at the start of this lecture. We'll look at it in a little more detail now with some cases. This response asks 2 questions. First, how widespread and deep is the fact of disagreement? Second, what does the fact of disagreement show? The first response points out that sometimes disagreement about factual matters affects what people actually believe, ethically. For example, Bill may say that we need to cut down on carbon monoxide emissions, while Jane says we do not have a moral duty to do so. While this looks like a basic moral disagreement, the difference may arise from the fact that Bill believes the emissions are causing harmful global effects, while Jane is not aware of any connection between carbon monoxide emissions and climate change, etc. So, they may both agree on the basic moral duty to improve the state of current living conditions while preventing serious harm, even though they disagree about relevant facts in this case that would lead to that judgment. Okay? Thus, some of the cultural differences may result from disagreement about facts and not moral matters at all. The ethical relativist needs to show that any disagreement in question is an instance of moral and not factual disagreement. The second response points out that people may disagree about what is the right thing to do while still acknowledging that there is a right thing to do. For example, when asked what year George Washington died, many students offer different dates. They are unsure. Does this mere fact of disagreement mean that George Washington did not die on any particular date? Clearly not, because they acknowledge that he did die on a date even if they cannot agree on it. And the uncertainty and disagreement about ethical matters may amount to no more than this. For this response, see Matthews, two-pronged response, see Matthews 2020, pages 11 to 12, More, The Objectivity of Moral Judgments, and the Archie and Archie Reader 2004, page 57 to 59. Okay, now looking at the argument from tolerance and open-mindedness. The response to this argument says that even the values of tolerance and open-mindedness would be deemed cultural and not universal. So, any choice to support them here is relative and not binding universally. Some may easily reject the value with no moral defect. However, the advocate of this line of reasoning means to support their view with more assuredness than an arbitrary decision. So for this response, see Matthews 2020, pages 13 to 14. Okay. Now let's look at the line of support for ethical relativism from moral uncertainty. The response to this argument points out that our uncertainty about how to act in certain situations raises an epistemological problem and not the ontological one. Basically, the problem is that the argument focuses on how we know something and not on whether it is true or not. It is really a problem of skepticism and not relativism. For example, someone may not know something about a particular fact or example, say whether they are doing the right thing by blowing the whistle on an unscrupulous employer, but this does not mean that there is no answer, that they are or are not doing the right thing. They just don't know whether they are or not, but that's consistent with them doing the right thing, even though they might be unsure. To the contrary, then, we are uncertain about some cases too. We are certain, about some cases too. So why just focus on uncertainty? And even if we do look at uncertainty, that doesn't mean that that relativism is true, that a person is in fact wrong. They just about something, moral behavior in this case, they just might not be certain. So for this response, see Matthews 2020, pages 12 to 13. And finally, for the argument from situational differences, the response points out that there may be differences regarding ways to support an objective moral aim, but these are consistent with an objective moral aim. For example, say that an objective moral aim is good health. Some people need to take insulin injections to stay in good health, while others do not need to take insulin. This only shows that there may be different ways of upholding the same basic principle, aim for good health. Similarly, the mere fact of situational differences does not show that there are no universal or objective moral values, or that people cannot endorse or accept such values in different conditions. For this response, see Matthews 2020, page 12. Another concern is with consistency. Is ethical relativism self-contradictory? Some ethicists conclude that ethical relativism is indeed self-contradictory because it means to offer some objective assessment of moral values while simultaneously saying there are no objective ethical truths. The most significant problem for the moral realist or objectivist is providing an alternative model to the relativist position, but this problem is addressed in the whole course. So it's interesting to note that even relativists, philosophers of truth, relativists and the pragmatic theorists of truth like Rorty concede that the type of ethical relativist who claims that morality is just relative to culture does not in fact exist. He doesn't know any relativists that actually make that claim. So it's an interesting observation from a relativist who's very influential in the area, modern philosopher Richard Rorty. All right, so turning to the discussion of moral realism in contrast to relativism, the difficulty with moral realism raised here is the problem of explaining how moral truth claims are grounded. Now, for discussion of this and introduction of this issue, see Dimock and Fisher, 2017, pages 98 to 99, 100 to 102, and 104 to 105. For example, the statement "a tree fell in the forest" is true if it refers to an actual external state of affairs in which a tree falls in a forest. Turning to moral claims, what makes the statement "John's act of saving the drowning child was good" true? Is there some universal object or reality to which the moral constituents of the statement refer? Is it merely a relational property between agents and other aspects of the whole affair? The realist says that there is some reality, and the challenge is to say just what this reality component is in order to ground the truth of moral claims. According to Dimock and Fisher, realists typically identify these properties as either natural, things like pain, pleasure, rational functions, and etc., or non-natural properties, properties that are sui generis or simple, brute, unexplainable, or mysterious. For more details, see Dimmock and Fisher, 2017, pages 98 to 106. Another concern with moral realism is moral pluralism. This problem arises when considering the possibility that there may be more than one good. For example, how does someone decide what to do when two or more principles come into conflict? These are usually called cases of moral dilemmas, and a pluralistic approach generally rejects any hierarchical or graded account of morality. Ross advanced a view stating that duties are graded or prima facie in fact, so some are more obligatory than others on his view. So the theoretical response then is that morality can be graded. And think about degrees of duties and responsibilities. Some are more important than others, right? Pay your taxes on time. That's an important duty. Is it as important as don't commit treason? That's probably more important, right? So the moral pluralism position doesn't look to raise an insuperable problem for moral realists. So in addition to the assigned reading, I've included some material and multimedia on relevant theories and concepts that I recommend that you look at in the week. I strongly recommend reading the article by Midgley, Trying Out One's New Sword. This is linked in the Engaging with the Materials link in the weekly module. A very simple and easy read, and it gets to the heart of the matter in the discussion of ethical relativism with some really good cases. And she argues that by using the old Japanese law, that it was lawful for samurai to try out their new swords on common people that they came across in society. So she looks at the practice that bystanders, peasants, could be just murdered in the interest of just trying out a new sword. In feudal Japan, samurai could do this. In fact, never widely accepted a practice, but in fact lawful. Now she argues that that's certainly an example of something heinous and immoral, and probably why it wasn't widely practiced. Nonetheless, the fact that it may have been accepted doesn't show that it should have been, right? So she points to examples from other cultures where we can find practices that we could say are immoral or wrong. And because we can do that, and the chief example there would be something like Nazi genocide. Nazi genocide was wrong, even though that was the practice of Germany, not America. We can still say it was wrong as Americans, even though we're not German. She points to examples like that to say there must be something wrong with ethical relativism then, because it creates what she calls moral isolationism. And that's the idea that we cannot give blame or praise to actions from other cultures, and that just seems wrong. We clearly can. If we can do that in our culture, there's no reason to think we can't make the same judgments about the same actions in other cultures. Okay, so I've also included some video material and multimedia under moral relativism. The first one is on Noam Chomsky, is a discussion with Noam Chomsky and moral relativism. And the second video addresses the question whether there are universal moral principles. I give some description of some of the multimedia in the Engaging the Material with the Materials link in the module. You might want to give that a quick read before you look at the multimedia, but there's some videos that I think are really helpful in processing the material and some of the arguments. So we've looked at some of the arguments for ethical relativism, 4 key ones, and looked at some serious responses, and conclude with the majority of ethicists moving forward that the strength of ethical relativism is not as strong as the case for ethical realism, but the main challenge for ethical realism is to just present an alternative account of how to explain the grounds of moral truth. And we'll look at how different ways of doing that throughout the remainder of the course. Okay, so if you have any questions about ethical relativism, the arguments for and arguments against responses, or any of the assigned readings and concepts from this week, feel free to reach out with an email or stop by Zoom virtual office hours, and I'm happy to explain and go into detail more about some of the concepts and theories, which we're looking in this case, ethical relativism, some of its arguments and such. I look forward to talking with you all very soon, and I'll talk with you next week. Bye-bye.